very long time. We are again back with one of our speaker sessions, just like we used to do last year with so many speakers over here. And then we just thought that let's kickstart, restart our equity sessions which we had planned last year with one another brilliant session with Mr. Siddharth Rastogi. So I'll just give you a little brief about Siddharth. So Siddharth is the principal officer, managing director, chief operating officer, and head of sales with Ambit Asset Management. Siddharth works for a full service investment bank and has over 2 decades of experience in financial markets. Siddharth specializes in economics, capital markets, fundraising, banking, and behavioral finance, not because of his degrees, but on account of the work he has done with various organizations throughout his life. Siddharth is a visionary and forward-looking thinker. He is an avid reader and writer. His articles on finance and life are very popular on social media. He is also the author of the book 8-Minute Decision, which helps with effective decision making. Siddharth was one of the co-founding members of IIFL Wealth, and prior to that, he was the branch head of HSBC Pedder Road branch, which is the biggest wealth branch in the country actually. He was the youngest branch head amongst all branches of HSBC India and turned the Pedder Road branch into the most profitable branch in the country with his highly motivated team and able leadership. Siddharth also worked with Citibank and UTI Bank in wealth management and merchant banking roles. Siddharth is an honors graduate in commerce from Delhi University, company secretary, and postgrad in finance and strategy from Nasi Monji Management Institute, Mumbai. Siddharth, very happy and pleased to have you here with us today. And the floor is all open for you. You can begin with your presentation. Thanks. And just wanted to give a kind of sorry before you start, guys. Any questions you can probably put in the chat box. I will pick it up once Siddharth finishes up, or if there is some questions which is kind of related to the topic he's speaking to. I'll try to I'll be very sorry, but I'll try to interrupt Siddharth in between and put that question up. So feel free to put up any questions. Siddharth, sorry, all yours.
Thank you, Weber. Thank you, Pranav. Thank you, the entire I'm Indore team. Thank you for sparing time. Before we move ahead, let's do the basic rituals, the disclaimer. Ambit Investment Advisors may or may not follow anything or everything what I hear, say, or present. Keep that in mind. The interesting part, and this is a caution, whatever you will hear in next 35 to 45 minutes may actually stir the basic investment thinking or philosophy which you have learned through the years. So be very cautious, and if you are not clear, ask, repeatedly ask. What is obsolete today was relevant yesterday, and what is relevant today will be obsolete yesterday, and it will be obsolete tomorrow. What does that literally mean? It means that change, technological change, rules of investing, and the companies which actually make money are dynamic in nature. Who would have thought a delivery company could have had a market cap of 1 lakh crore? Who could have thought that the next run, the next addition in market capitalization to GDP ratio, and that market capitalization will be brought by businesses which are new generation, which are new technology. 15, 20 years back, it was unheard of. Today, it is the reality, and next 3 years to next 30 years, if people do not embrace this, you will be a loser. But how to identify these companies? And everybody wants to become rich. Everybody wants to make money from the wealth they have earned by working very hard or by inheriting. How do you put it to good use? I think all of you are very, very young. Some of you are entrepreneurs. Some of you are business people. Some of you are seasoned professionals. And today, now, you have the golden opportunity because there are only 4 classes of investment, and that 4 classes have actually zeroed down to only equities, because equities is today the only methodology by which you can become wealthier and richer. And why do I say so? Interest rates are lowest in the history of India. Gold is giving you inflation returns. Real estate, rather illiquid, and the unreasonable upside which real estate used to provide at a point in time is history. The only asset class left which is legitimate and logical is equities. But what is the problem with equities? It's interesting that 79, when Sensex was born, till today, you have significantly large number of companies which have listed on the Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange. And today also, keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that Indian bourses have the largest number of listed companies in the world, even if I remove the overlap, which is closer to 5,300 listed companies. And nearly in a good buoyant year, 700 to 1,200 companies get listed. Unfortunately, this number doesn't grow. And the reason this number doesn't grow is equivalent number of companies keep dying, keep getting out, delisted, defunct. They become history. And the interesting part is, what you can see is that nearly 65% of the listed companies do not even outperform the inflation on a compounding basis. If you take 5 years compounding, 10 years compounding, 15 years compounding, 20 years compounding. That's the challenge, biggest challenge of the stock markets. The logic, the rationale is simple. Poor capital allocation, crony capitalism, dubious accounting practices, cyclicality of business. Businesses are not able to maneuver, to outperform, to go through the cycles. They perish when there is down cycle, when there is depression, when there is recession in the economy. By the way, you guys are living in the golden period, as I mentioned earlier, because you are witnessing historically low interest rates. You are witnessing historically low cost and higher productivity. You are seeing an era of transformation from largely physical to digital, which essentially means disintermediation, lower supply side inflation, lower constraint on the supply, and hence lower inflation. It's a unique era. Another unique era in which you are living is the sheer demographics. I'm sure a lot of you are aware. Let me just reiterate some very simple numbers here. India is a land of 138 crore people. 54% of the Indians, 54% of the Indians are below 25 years of age. 25 years of age, which means we are the youngest country in the world. Second, 64% or nearly 2/3 of the population is in the earning zone between 15 years to 59 years. What does that mean? It means that for every one dependent, and if you are having the earning potential, 2 people are earning for 1 extra person to be supported too. Never it has happened in the history of India. The estimates are that by 2025, the median age of India would be 31. And by 2050, it will be 37. By 25, US median age will be 42. This is the demographic dividend, which is unprecedented. And you know what is the beauty of this? Why am I telling you all this? The reason why am I telling you all this is, if you are in this group, if any one of you are thinking about starting your own business, start being an entrepreneur, doing a startup venture, there is no better period than this, because within span of 1,000 days, any business in India done with reasonable smartness, reasonable integrity, reasonable ethics will break even at the operating level. 1,700 days, it will break even at the PAT level. And I think that's the problem. That's the problem which happens in stock market as well, when the free cash flows start coming in. Let me illustrate this with a very simple example. I'm sure all of you guys have heard of Sintex Industries, Sintex tanks. Sintex was synonymous to the plastic tanks. Think about the man. The company was started in 1930s, 1940s as one of the corduroy jeans maker. The man realized that as the urbanization after independence, as the urbanization will grow, the villages will turn into cities and semi-urban areas. There will be huge requirement for potable water. And if you remember, when I was a kid, I'm very old. When I was a kid, we used to have these cement tanks. You cannot move them, you cannot shift them. And if there is a crack, a mason has to come and he has to repair us with a cement, and then for 3 or 4 days, you have no potable water. With the high rises, the only way forward was Sintex. And the man shifted his entire focus into manufacturing these Sintex. Sintex became the Asia's largest plastic tank manufacturing company in the world. Bingo. Free cash flows, tons and tons of money. He sent his son abroad. His son came back. He said, "Father, I wanted to do something more exciting business. You have been doing this for donkey's years. You have grown this business. I want something more exciting." Being a father, he couldn't decline. And the son said, "Let's start doing this corduroy business again. And along with it, reality is hot. The real estate is hot. Let's venture into that." The good money started going into the bad money. The good money was getting deployed into the ventures which will deliver negative ROEs, lower ROEs. The debt started to mount, and just 24 months back, they defaulted. Today, Sintex Industries and Sintex Plastics, both the companies are defunct, default, and they have siphoned off the money as per the Punjab National Bank's official records to the extent of 1,300 crores. A company which was the leader in plastic tanks, the largest manufacturer in Asia, today is a defunct company. Why does this happen? Why does this happen? Let me take you through a very interesting concept. Very interesting concept. This happened sometime in the end of 18th century and early 19th century. Britishers had ruled India for nearly 150 years by then. In 1957, 1958, the Queen's official rule got established in 1857, 1858, Queen's official rule got established in India. And India became a Commonwealth country ruled under the crown. The best of the people started. Till then, not the best officers from Britishers came and ruled India, exploited India. At that point in time, the most powerful, the most sophisticated Britishers, bureaucrats were sent to rule India and to set up the administration. And they were sent to Delhi. In Delhi, they had a peculiar problem because generally these guys had rich taste. They had this habit of going to the clubs, evening clubs, every day drinking, having merry, having good time. The only problem in the clubs, there were multiple clubs which were there in Delhi, but there was a small problem. The problem was there were way too many snakes in Delhi, in the clubs. They tried to kill, they kept trying for 6-8 months. They couldn't find a solution. So what they did, they came out with a novel idea. They said, whosoever in Delhi, whosoever will give me the dead snake skin will be rewarded a handsome bounty. Bingo. Next 6 months, they paid through their nose very large sums. Lots and lots of people gave the dead skin, and those dead skins of snake were burnt in front of the people who were brought in, and then the bounty was given. So there was no question of recycling. But then they realized that the numbers which were supposed to be coming down, they are just increasing. Then they appointed a smart ICS office, Indian civil servant during the British regime. He was appointed to look into the matter. What's the matter? And he realized that Indians are rather smart people, very, very smart people. As this bounty came into play, the Indians at the back end started to harvest, started to get more snakes to be produced. And those snakes were then killed and they were brought in to get bounty. So the intention was right. However, the outcome was exactly opposite of what was thought. This is known as Cobra effect. This was coined by the famous German economist Horst Siebert. And this happens in life, this happens in economics, this happens in politics, this happens in investments. Unintended, unplanned consequences. There are multiple case studies how Cobra effect have actually come into play and have led to multiple challenges which one can't figure out. One of the biggest perils of investing is that we believe that we know, and we know what is the right action to be done. And when we do the right action, that's when the challenge arises, and that's when the Cobra effect comes into play. And let me take you through a very interesting example. So this is May 17, 2004. This is the first time a coalition NDA-1 came into play in 1999. The first time it actually came was for 13 days Vajpayee government, and then this is the second Vajpayee government which completed its term. They did a lot of developmental work. The first golden quadrilateral was planned. There was water, sanitation, water storage, multiple things were implemented in 5 years from 1999 till 2004. Everybody was thinking that this is a government which believes in development and they will come back into power. They managed to get over to the dot-com bubble in a significant manner. Stock markets during their regime went down and then they bounced back as well. And people thought that now the government is gone, sell. And what happened? The Sensex fell by 11% when the news came that Vajpayee government is no more be the central government of India. And the same thing happened in 2009 after the 2008 general financial crisis, the great financial crisis, which engulfed the entire world. Manmohan Singh government came back into power, unexpected. Although 2004, 5, 6, 7 were the golden period in terms of equity, in terms of the corporate India, in terms of the GDP to the corporate profits, any parameter, they were one of the best periods. People thought this government, if it comes back, bingo. And it came back. It came back. 2 days upper circuit, Sensex and Nifty jumped up by nearly 17%. What is your intuitive mind going to say? Very, very simple. In the first case, sell everything, put your money into FDs, put your money into gold, put your money into safe haven. And the second, intuitively, put everything. Good days, golden days are here to stay. What happened in reality? Let's check out. If you haven't sold when the Vajpayee government tumbled down, by doing nothing for next 3 years, you would have made only 47% compounding, nearly 150% returns. Your $100, your 1 crore would have become only 2.5 crores by doing nothing, and not by stock selecting, not by picking up the jewels, but by simply investing into the index. Similarly, if you would have thought that, hey, look, 17% on 2 days, now is the time, the golden India is back, you would have only made 4% compounding in next 3 years. Just over 13% in 3 years. Little worse than FD, maybe. So that's the challenge. That's the Cobra effect, guys. People believe trading, people believe that taking action depending on the news is beneficial. We get so much WhatsApp, Twitter, so much of news, and every news is powerful. So act, react. And when you act and react, Cobra effect happens. In the West, before the Great Depression, there was something known as the ticker tape effect. What does that mean? You keep ticking, when you keep doing, at that point in time, the ticker used to have sound. And with the sound, your mind gets linked. And when your mind gets linked, that sound means act. It means buy or sell. And that's how people evolved into these trading things. And people started believing that trading creates money. Trading creates lots and lots of money. Some people also believe that keep doing more and more. And this is particularly important, even not only in investments, but people believe in life as well. Some people, you must have seen that they work for 14 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours. And they keep doing more and more and more and more and more and more things. Now, more and more things doing in the right direction and ensuring there is a huge probability is a different thing. Just by doing constantly doing more things does not mean that more things are getting done. And it reduces the satisfaction level. It reduces the growth if you keep doing things very fast, very, very quickly. So there are five lessons which we need to learn while investing first. And this is very, very important, guys. If you want to make a note of it first, as human beings, when we invest into the markets, when we invest into the equities, the first thing we do, we always average out the costs, which means we average the stocks which are in loss. What does that simply mean? It simply means that if I bought a stock at 100 rupees and if the stock has fallen at 80, and if the stock has then fallen at 60, I will buy at 80, then I'll buy at 60 and keep averaging. Similarly, if the stock keeps moving up from 100 to 120 and 140, I will not keep adding whilst I will keep trimming it down. So I will keep accumulating more and more losers in my kitty, and I'll keep cutting the legs of my fastest horses. And then you have repercussions which follow, the Cobra effect. Because then you are only left with losers and your principal keeps getting diminished. IPO frenzy. Sometimes we get into the IPOs without even knowing what the company is into. Just looking at the gross, just looking at the market, just looking at the oversubscription, just looking at the gray market premium, we invest without even knowing. And that frenzy can actually turn into a bad investment should the markets topple. Exactly the similar manner happened in 2015 in 2014 when the second time the NDA government came, and all of a sudden the Chinese currency got devalued. In a matter of 2 months, the markets gave up nearly 30% of the gains. Every IPO which was on the street bled. So before you invest, I'm not saying don't invest into the IPOs, but read carefully what you are investing, why you are investing, because ultimately it's your hard-earned money. Another very interesting fallacy of stock markets and the jump in stock market is, as the stock market is raising through the newer heights, more and more people are actually quitting their jobs who are at the lower strata or who are unskilled people, and they start believing that investing in equities and making money on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis is much easier. And they get out of the real economy and they become part of this stock market bubble game. And when the downturn comes, not only their entire money, their entire saving gets wiped out, but they are left high and dry because they have no skill which have been undertaken, and they become complacent, spoiling their lives. Another very interesting thing, a lot of people believe that giving a high hurdle when you are investing and talking with people who are giving you higher hurdles is a very good thing, because you have alignment of interest. Higher returns with a higher hurdle, it means you will make more money and then pay more money. But there's a Cobra effect to it. The Cobra effect is to generate those high hurdles on a consistent basis. The investment manager is going to constantly take riskier bets, is going to constantly take higher amounts of beta, higher amount of volatility to be built into the portfolio, which means ultimately you may save on the expenses, on the management fees, on the performance fees, but you will end up paying higher amount of cost by the erosion on your principal. So keep that in mind. What's the answer to these? Very, very simple, very, very simple. Clean and consistent. What does clean mean? Lots of things. Let me quickly run through them. But the first 2 points which are in bold, they are the most important ones, which is CFO by EBITDA. Now it's interesting. It's very interesting that most companies, what they do, their CFO, cash flow from operations, divided by EBITDA is actually not 1. It's sometimes 0.5, sometimes 0.6. What does that mean? It simply means, so let's start from the beginning. You guys are all smart graduates. Sales minus cost of goods sold is operating profit or EBITDA. And if there is no interest cost, that should be the bank balance. That should be the cash flow from operations. Why should there be a difference? The difference can be if I under invoice my costs, or if my sales are fictitious. And how can I do it? Very simply. I went on a particular day to meet Pranav. He kindly invited me to his house and I gifted him this small mobile. This mobile, which is a gift, is never gonna be accounted for in the books of accounts, or the cash or the receivable will never come back. But what I'm going to do is very simple. I will show sales to do the contra entry, the contra, the equivalent entry, because I'm not going to receive cash. So what I'm going to receive is receivables. So I will put it under the receivables column, equivalent to the sales, so that the balance sheet is balanced out. And when the balance sheet is balanced out during tough years, I keep showing it as receivables. Keep showing it as receivables. During good times, those receivables get written off. Nobody gets to know about it. Another very simple example, and nearly 17 to 18 accidents have happened in last 36 months in corporate India. Some of the famous big high growth companies have met with serious accounting accidents. The interesting part is all their auditors knew about that these accidents are coming into play. In fact, one of the large mutual funds which met with a serious accident where investors lost money, even there the auditors raised the red flag. Even the compliance team raised the red flag. The problem is people were deaf to their calls, to their shouts, to their questions. What can a common investor like you, like me can do? Very simple. Every year there is a Bible which is published by the company which is known as the balance sheet. Just open the balance sheet. Now you have PDF version. Just search the auditor's remuneration. Audit is a cost. If audit's cost is increasing by more than 5, 6, 7%, it should be a red flag. If the auditor has quit and if the auditor's remuneration is jumping by 25% or 50%, definitely something is in the anvil. Something is coming forth. Go deeper. That's the biggest red flag not to invest into that company, irrespective of how lucrative that is, because there is no auditor who's going to quit and a new auditor who's going to come at 50% jump. When SEBI mandates that every auditor can only be there for 4 years, why would you chuck out an auditor and bring a new auditor with a 30, 40, 50% jump? Does not make sense, because you want something out of that auditor which the previous existing auditor is not doing. One very small but powerful methodology to know how to protect your capital. The third, diminishing yield on the capex. Most companies, what they do, they keep setting up capex. When they set up the capex, they say that X amount is being raised in the form of debt or equity for doing this capex, and capex will get completed in 18 months, and the marginal ROE on the incremental capital which has been put in will yield you 15%, 20%. All of a sudden, those numbers after the capex, after 18 months, they go haywire. Every time that money is being removed from the system. And that's a very simple and a very powerful way of siphoning from the listed companies. Another red flag is the consistent jump in the contingent liability. More and more people keep loading the contingent liability, the actual liability which is having a higher possibility of happening in the form of contingent liability, without providing it for. Another interesting way is if you want to keep your EPS number consistent, if you want to show your EPS number consistent, if you want to show your profits, the PAT, the cash PAT constant, the PE multiples to remain constant. Very, very simple. Directly take your losses and write it off from your reserves. Don't bring them in the profit and loss. Some companies have innovatively done it. Another interesting thing is the consistent change in the depreciation methodology as well. So some companies constantly keep changing the depreciation from one quarter to another quarter to another quarter, or 1 year to another year. Sometimes they write off by 15%, sometimes they write off by 30%, because depreciation, we all know, is a non-cash item and it impacts only at the PAT level. So you want to maintain that consistent PAT, and that's why you keep changing the depreciation level. Another very interesting thing people do is change in the receivables. We all know in any industry we work that receivables which are more than 120 days are never going to come. But what we do is we keep changing. We see that sometimes the receivable days are 90 and sometimes it is 150. How the hell can the receivables change so dramatically when there are no disruptions in the underlying economy? And if there are, it means that something is being cooked, something is being covered up. Now, how do you get to know all these simple things? Very, very simple. Go on any of the financial websites. There are 3 or 4 good financial websites available free of cost, Just go and look at them. Go on the left-hand side, balance sheet and P&L, you will get all the costs. Just compare for 2 or 3 years, you will get the answer, the basic check, whether you should be investing in that company or not. And then there are other factors like they should be apolitical. So do not invest in any business. Do not invest in any business which has any political linkage. Today they may be in power, tomorrow they may be out of power. Today they are ruling party, tomorrow they may be in opposition. Today they are in opposition, they may be in ruling party. You don't know. So let the companies have moats around themselves in a manner in which they can sustain their growth from their own talent, from their own people, not by the political talent. No bureaucratic linkages, you understand that. Good corporate governance, you understand that. No third-party linkages. What does that mean? No third-party linkages. It simply means that a lot of companies, a lot of businesses bring their relatives on the board. The largest distributor of their products in the West, in a lucrative geography, Mama ka ladka. Can't understand the relation, no credibility, but that gentleman has whole power to distribute. All of a sudden, you will see the biggest supplier is your close relative, your brother's son, promoter's son. Why would you have it? And if there is, are there those disclosures which have been made in the balance sheet? If not, it's a red flag. Today, they may be riding high, but when things will turn sour, these are the businesses which will wipe out your wealth. Remember that despite of equity markets being for nearly 41 years plus, Sensex has been in existence since 79. How many people you have known who have become millionaires or billionaires only by investing? Hand few. Whilst large number of people burn their fingers because they don't do the basics, despite of favorable demographics, despite of favorable GDP growth, despite of companies growing in a secular linear fashion. Because we tend to invest too soon, too fast, on too narrow information, too short, too brief information. And that acts as a cobra effect, because we believe that if we don't invest now, the bus is missed. In the process, the principal is missed out. This is the most, so that was the cleanliness part. Let's talk about the consistent part. And these are very simple rules. You can calculate it for last 4 or 5 years, simply only for 5 years, And that 5 years chart actually you got on some of the financial websites in a single shot. Very, very simple. Revenue growth between 8% to 12% consistently year after year for 5 years. And why this 8 and 12%? Why not 15%? Why not 20%? Very simple logic. Very simple logic. In a year of 2008, when the Great Depression or the Great Financial Crisis happened, even that year, India's GDP nominally, real plus inflation grew by more than 10%. At that point, on that year, in that particular year, the growth was nearly 3.5%, and inflation was close to 5 to 6%. So it was closer to a number of 9 to 10%. Now, if during a bad year, you can see a nominal GDP growth of India by 9-10%, why shouldn't the companies deliver inflation included number by 8 to 12%? Doesn't make sense. And remember, whenever the companies give you the yearly revenues, they don't net the inflation out. The inflation is part and parcel. Second, PAT growth. As the company keeps growing, the revenues are sweated, and then the operating profit comes, and then from the operating profit, the PAT comes. The PAT should be at least be higher from 13% to 15% year after year for last 5 years, exactly the same manner. Why so? Because if your revenues are growing at a rate of 8 to 12%, cost efficiencies will kick in. Economies of scale, we all have learned this concept in 6th standard, economies of scale. So as the company will keep becoming bigger, you will have cost savings, and the PAT should improve anything from 13% to a 15%, adding just 200 basis points. That's all for last 5 years. The third important factor is the ROC, the return on capital employed. The return on capital employed, that number is a tricky number. So we understand what is ROC. It's a blended, it's a return on total capital employed, which is the incremental capital, which has been the debt and equity put together, the PAT divided by the debt and equity capital put together. That's known as the ROC. But first, we have to understand what is the weighted average cost of debt in this country. If I look at the weighted average cost of the debt, leave apart just 18 months, it has been in the range of 11 to 12%, including the processing fee, maybe higher. So if the cost of debt in this country is 12%, the cost of equity has to be higher than the debt, because the risk is higher. So if the cost of equity is 14%, then your ROCs should be 14-15% consistently, to make sure that you are doing justice with the limited capital which has been allocated to you. Another thing which a lot of people don't look at is the cash EPS growth. So I told you about how the PAT can be managed, but cash EPS cannot be managed. And hence, cash EPS at least should be equivalent to the EPS or higher than that, not necessarily lower than that, which means your cash conversion, your sales are actually not sales, it is dubious. Your expenses are being underreported. That's what cash EPS translates into. Hence, very, very important that you necessarily look at this number. If you even forget anything else, the cash EPS should be minimum 13 to 15% or higher year after year. This is the single number if you're able to capture amongst everything else. You will not be able to go wrong with at least on the downside. Upside, I'm not talking about, but downside. And in equity investing, it's more important to protect the downside than the upside. Why? Because we all understand if you're $100 invested in January of 2020 would have gone down by only 40%. By March, April of 2020, it would take nearly 66%, nearly 75% returns to come back to the principal. So going down by 40, coming back, it needs 75% returns, 75%. Whilst if you're down only by 10%, it only requires 11-12% to come back to your principal. So the interesting thing is, in equities, the person who wins is not the one who makes more money on the upside by 1% or 2% or 3%. It does not matter. Whether you make 36 or 38 or 34 does not matter. What matters in equity investing is how much you are protecting on the downside. Because when you are protecting on the downside, those are the businesses which are relatively safer. And how do you identify these businesses? Some of the 18, 17, 18 parameters which I spoke about, but the most important ones being the auditor's remuneration, the cash flow from EBITDA, and the cash EPS. Barring the qualitative aspects of being apolitical, non-bureaucratic, those are subjective. Those are digital, yes or no. But these are somewhere you have to put in your time and effort to understand. And remember, it's your money, so you better put time and money and effort into figuring this out. Another thing which you should look for is very, very simple. Businesses essentially, and this is applicable across the board, small cap, mid cap, large cap. Try and pick businesses which are debt free. Now you will think about that, what crap am I talking about? Because we all understand the power of financial leverage. You borrow money at a lesser cost and you put the money at good use at a higher yield. What happens if the cost of leverage becomes higher? What if it is a small cap company and the cost of leverage becomes higher than the margin it is earning? And why am I saying so? Because India is a capital-starved country. The fiscal deficit, which is between the state government, the central government, the local government, the municipalities put together, is between 12% to 15%, which means we constantly need external debt capital to support, which means I cannot control the capital. The capital determination, the interest rate determination happens in the West. So better to pick up businesses which are debt-free. Second, they are B2C. I spoke about the demographics. I spoke about the younger population. So pick up businesses which do not thrive on the exports. Pick up businesses where the demand is intrinsic. People believe you should invest into the monopolies. I believe totally. And monopoly, not necessarily. Large market, large national market, not necessary. Small market. If you're a small cap company, small market, you may be a leader in the process. You may be leader in the micro market. You may be leader in the geography. Why is monopoly important? One simple reason. When the tough times will come, these are the businesses which are able to manage their margins well. Their margins very, very well. Because there is TINA factor. There is no alternative. You are the monopoly. And the market should be growing. Fortunately, most of the businesses in India are in a growth market. You don't want to buy films, the plastic film manufacturing business. You don't want to buy the camera manufacturing business. So practically all businesses in India, thankfully, are in the growing regime. Last couple of slides. This is very, very powerful. This is one analogy I just wanted to give you guys. How your small, very, very small efforts can lead to very big changes in wealth creation. So just to give you a perspective, if you are able to grow your money, at the rate of 19-20% and not doing anything, just by remain invested over a period of 34-35 years, your 1 crore can potentially become 1,000 crores. 1,000 crores. Now you will say that's a complete lifetime, but as per the Vedantic philosophy, our lifetime is 120 years, not 60 years, what people think about. So you have all the time. You can start now. You can start today. Buy good businesses, buy quality business, and stay invested for longer periods of time. Only pull out money when you essentially need it. Pool your resources. Do not divide the resources. Another thing which people do, they constantly cut the resources into different buckets. When you cut the resources, the efficiency, the power of the consolidated resources diminish. You have to manage more number of buckets, and your time, your energy, your focus dilutes. And this is a classic example of how small changes can lead Novak Djokovic, anybody who understands tennis, understands that there are matches. Matches are made of games. Games are made of sets. Sets are made of points. And Novak Djokovic is one of the most decorated players in the history of tennis. Not very long back, when he started his career in 2004 and 5, his rank was 682 in the world. Over the next 2 or 3 years, his rank will improve from 680 to number 3, and from 2011 till 2018, he became number 1 player. And again, today, he's the number 1 player back again. Rightfully so, when he was 682, he was earning merely $300,000 per annum as the prize money. And then when he became number 3, the money jumped from $5 million and then to $14 million. And you can see the number of matches he won also improved dramatically to get that rank. From 682, he was only winning 49% of the total matches he was playing. Next 2-3 years, he started winning 79% of the matches. And from 2011 onwards, he started winning 90% of the matches. That's all very logical, very, very standard. What is interesting is this. Logical that 49% of the points he was winning 49% of the matches. He was earning $300,000 per annum and he was 682. Just by increasing his percentage from 49 to 52, 3% increase in the total points, not the matches, not the games, not the sets, points. Only by 52%, he became number 3. Only by 3. And next 3, he'll become the world champion. He'll become the world champion. Very small steps, very, very small steps, very powerful. Last, this is the key mantra. This is what I call, this is what everybody should opt for. Have a goal. Have a goal. A is important. Don't have multiple goals. A goal. If you have a goal post, you will definitely gonna score in that goal post. Most people keep having multiple goal posts. If they don't have multiple goal posts, their goal posts keep changing. I have not achieved my first goal and my second goal post has already arrived. And then third, depending on the situation. And that's the challenge with the financial investments as well. Please consolidate all your resources together. Whatever is there is a contingency fund, barring that, everything, pool it together, invest in a manner which is judicious, which is all through what we have spoken about, and have a single goal. A single goal. Similarly, your life should have a single goal. Your profession should have a single goal. The Olympians who win at Olympics, they don't have multiple goals. There are Olympians who haven't gone home for last 2-3 years. They don't have multiple goals, one goal. And that's what Aristotle said. Man is a goal-seeking animal. Second thing, this is from Patanjali Yoga Sutra. Vivekhayati tir pilava hanupaye, which means uninterrupted practice of discrimination between real and unreal. Enables you to remove the ignorance. What does this in simple terms means? Discipline and practice. You will keep getting lot of noise from all across, Cut it out. Keep focusing on your simple goal, The reason why you cracked your IIM Indore is not because you had multiple goals. You had one goal. You did it. And the last, Pragyanam Brahm, which essentially means insights. If you have the Gyan, so the supreme power is of the power of Gyan. And everything is within you. Just introspect who you are, what resources you have, what is your true goal. Focus all the energy, and the goal can be yours in life, in investing, in relationships, in any sphere you want to. That's all, friends, ladies and gentlemen. happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Siddharth. I mean, that was wonderful. The kind of analogies you gave, and the ending was super. And I'm sure for your cleanliness and the consistency and all those approaches you spoke about, for a lot of people on this Zoom video, it would be a kind of a revision what we would have studied many years back at our campus. So a great to hear you. We have got a lot of questions, and we have actually kind of touched towards like 1 hour of our time, but we can quickly look at these questions. Before I go to the questions we have received on a chat, my personal one question to you, and not a question, but you spoke about IPOs somewhere in the beginning of your session. I just wanted to have a piece of your mind. I mean, see, I have a little different theory about IPOs. What is currently happening in India, right? I mean, IPOs are just on the listing, they are gaining 60, 70, 80, even 100%. They are just doubling. Now, what my theory is that, see, basically, if you are a retail investor, and I'm only talking from the perspective of a retail investor, not an HNI or a QIB, and I believe that many of the people on the call are, if not 100%, but many of the people would be retail investors. My theory is that if you are a retail investor, do you really want to get into the studying the fundamentals when the company has not even been listed? Because what you can do is, first of all, for me, IPO is a crap for retail investors. It's a lottery ticket, right? In the lottery ticket, the maximum what you are applying to when the IPOs are getting oversubscribed is 15,000. Even if it is listing 20-30% down from 15,000, you are maximum losing 5,000-6,000 rupees for a lottery which has not even got a cost of entry, right? But the upside is kind of double in this kind of a market. Now, whether the company is a Rolex rings is doing whatever, but people thinking that it is making watches or something, and it is getting listed at 100%. So I mean, people are like, boss, I applied. It's my luck. It got oversubscribed by 20 times. By luck, I got the subscription. It went up 100%. I exited on listing. I made 15,000 in just a matter of 6 working days or 9 calendar days. Now, my theory is when the company is listed, then there would be a lot of information available in the public markets, because in DRHP, RHP, you know that you cannot be, kind of learn about each and everything about the company. That's what investment bankers and the lawyers and the management want to show, basically, obviously under the ambit of the regulations. So the point is that why should someone invest in the IPOs? I mean, if you want to invest, just take your time, get the company listed, study about like 3 months, 6 months, let the financial results come out, see what the management is saying, see what they have mentioned in the DRHP and in their objectives and visions, and then probably get into it probably on the dips. So if you want to apply in the IPO, first of all, don't apply. But if you want to apply, then only for listing gains is probably what my theory says.
So I totally agree. I totally agree with you, what Vaibhav, you are saying, that without studying, you should not even think of applying an IPO. But even if you want to apply, so think about the perils. Everybody's thinking about making that quick gains. There are 2 or 3 things. A, when there is such a massive, huge oversubscription, you have to block your money at least for 6, 7, 8 days, right? You need to have that kind of money. And what happens is this is a kind of an ongoing game. You have to keep aside some amount of money which otherwise could have been utilized in a manner which has been secular, right? So it's something like when you are going at a steady train of 80, 90 kilometers, you all of a sudden want to get out, get into a jet plane for half a kilometer and then come back and then get in. Now, the problem is if you do all those things in a hurry, there are times when you can there can be accidents, right? Hence, my request always would be, if you even want to speculate, then you speculate better, go into a casino better, where the odds are favorable. Then there is a better way, right? Bitcoins is a better speculation. Who's stopping you from speculation if you think that's the only agenda? Now, investing and betting are 2 different things, and we are not talking about betting here. This is quick money, which is pure lottery, as you rightly said, and hence there are other avenues of betting. So my request to everyone who's there on the screen, who's listening, is avoid this temptation of making that 10, 15,000 quick bucks, because that is a huge challenge in keeping that that money aside, managing that you getting, not getting, and after you have got it, then you have to pay the short-term capital gains, you have to manage all of that, and then wait for the next one. In the process, you have wasted entire year where you could have invested into a good company which could have yielded you maybe on your total capital, because nobody looks at the total capital invested in. If I look at the total ROE on your money, the returns which you actually are getting on the uninvested cash is zero, right? So nobody looks at it. Unfortunate, but nobody looks at it. And hence, in last 1 year, if you would have invested into any of the good companies during tough times, you would have made a killing out of it on the entire principle.
But on the similar point, you said that don't invest when the markets are actually going down. I mean, when 100 is becoming 80 and becoming 60 and you are averaging down. Let's say you have identified few quality companies and you are getting opportunities like what we got in March 2020. Or I'll give you a couple of examples. When if you would have, you are following markets since decades, I'm sure. So I remember when I started my investment journey in 2010 or 11, this case happened with Maruti when there's in their Manesar plant, there was this VP of HR killed and strike happened and the share price suddenly, kept going down. Now, someone who would have analyzed a company like Maruti, high quality, I mean, he should probably make use of the dips and keep adding when the company is falling. Similar case was when Nestle, the Maggi issue happened, right? So I think for the quality companies, if you have analyzed them properly, it is okay to add some stocks when the stock is going down, because in the long run, if you are okay to invest in that company, remain invested for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, I think that making use of the dips would be beneficial for you. What's your opinion on that?
100%, Weber. So remember the cutting of the fastest legs, when I'm talking about, is people, what they do invariably when you have a basket of stocks, it's not about a stock. So when you have basket of stocks of 10, 15, and everybody invests into at least 15 stocks, if not more, right? Nobody invests in 1 or 2 stocks. Correct. What will happen is there will be some winners, some losers. In a general parlance, what we do, we keep averaging the ones which are underperforming. Generally, I'm not talking about the macro correction which you're talking about. Macro correction, absolutely insane, because macro is noise. For me, right. Macro is noise. There is no macro in this world. There's no macro in this world. Even something which is happening because of the China today will tomorrow not be there, because macro, everything is going to balance out. What matters is company. That's about it. Now, the problem is what people misunderstand is that I need to only keep averaging the ones which are losing money. So if I've done an equi-weighted investment of 10 stocks of 100 rupees, the ones which have become 8 rupees or 6 rupees or 4 rupees, I'll keep adding more money. And I will keep leaving my faster sources, or in fact, when I need the money, I will remove the money from my faster sources. Let me give you a very simple example. And this is a practical example, and I can ask you a question. You are an intelligent one. Hopefully, I'm sure you'll be right. I have given you 1 lakh rupees on January 1st, 2020 to invest in stock A and stock B. Information is equally important, equally there. So there is no information anomalies. So you have both the information of both the companies together. Company A, 1 lakh, company B, 1 lakh, you have invested. After 15 months, on 31st of March 2021, that 1 lakh has become 2.5 lakhs, and the second 1 lakh, company B, has become 80,000. Your wife comes that, hey, look, you have, from your 2 lakhs, you have made a killing of 320. Phenomenal. I need to go to Tanishq and I need to buy a bracelet, gold bracelet. Please come and buy with me. We need to spend 50,000. Which stock you're going to sell?
Okay, I would assume that if all the information I have and I have made a good decision as to which company, probably, I mean, I have studied both the company's fundamentals and I'm pretty sure that these companies are in the long run going to be pretty good. Depends upon which industry they are in, because, in the last 1 year, which industries actually ran, and there are some industries which have not performed very well. If I'm pretty confident with the long-term returns or performance of these companies, I would actually, kind of, if my wife, whatever the amount she needs, I would take out half from each one of them.
Correct. So ideally you should, so both the companies, but what will essentially happen, most people will exit from the company number 1.
Yes.
Most people, 99% of the people, you have taken a prudent decision because you are reducing the exposure in both the companies because you believe both of them are in sync. But most people will exit from the first company.
Profit booking.
In the name of profit booking.
Correct.
Another thing which people have challenges is, once you exit, once you exit a company, you don't buy the same company if it moves higher. So that's known as the anchoring effect, which we all suffer. I have bought HDFC Bank. I have bought HDFC Bank at 500 rupees and I exited making a killing at 900. Today it is 1400. You are foolish. I'm not going to buy unless it comes back to 850 or 900. And it is never going to come back, right? So those are the biases which I'm talking about. So I believe macro is news. News is noise. Noise is irrelevant to the ears.
Correct. And I think anchor. Yeah, sorry.
Only you should look at the businesses, the nuances of the businesses. That's what matters. And you're absolutely right. If there is anomaly in the business because of any extraneous reasons, grab and buy. Buy with both the hands.
Correct. So without further wasting my time or the time on my questions, I think I'll pick up some questions from the audience and put it up to you. Just a second. Okay. Right. So Abhishek is asking if an individual wants to bifurcate his investments into two parts, long-term investment and trading book. What is the difference in approach required for identifying whether the stock should be a long-term investment or for trading, and what investment philosophy to be used for each of the buckets? I think your philosophy is for the long-term only, right? So
correct. So very, very simple, Abhishek. What you should do is first, for the long-term strategy, think about it. Do these three filters. The businesses which are growing secularly for last 5 years on the cash EPS in terms of 14-15%, you can just buy these businesses and leave them for next 20 years. You will comfortably gonna get mid-teens to mid-20s CAGR. Just leave them forever. For trading, try your luck. It's as good as doing casino in Goa or some other place. Try your luck. You will get better. Every time you keep doing it, you will keep getting better at it. Soon you will realize that your time and energy more is getting wasted here, and then you will quit eventually. But try it, because if traders wouldn't have existed, the brokers would have never driven BMWs.
True.
Whether client drives a Merc or a BMW, all the brokers globally drive Merc and BMW.
Correct. We'll move on to next question from Miyush. What he's saying is that when we say timing is less important at index level, if you look at longer 10-year periods, so mid cap and small caps and large caps give almost similar returns. Okay, here I would not agree to it, because mid and small caps have generally given like 3 or 4% alpha. But okay, let's assume that. So in mid and small caps, timing seems very important, as otherwise you are better off investing into just large cap indices, passive investing. So how do you approach mid and small cap mutual fund entry and exit?
Okay, so by the way, I will send. So this is a very interesting question, and I will send a link to the organizers of this group. A very simple, simplistic note, which mentions that in last 10 years, and this is the data which I have computed for last 10 years from 1st of April 2011 till about 31st of March 2021. There are 2,200 trading days in those 10 years. Had you missed out only 1% of the days, which essentially means 22 days, and those all days happened with unpredictable news. So all of them, you couldn't have predicted what is coming forth. You would have only lost 100% of the returns, 100% in absolute terms. So the point I'm trying to say is, there is no way you can time the market, because if anyone could have timed the market, you could have just become, you are God, literally. And I'll give you very, very simple examples. If any one of you want to hear this, the country witnessed one of the biggest challenges on 14th of February of 2019. 51 of our brave soldiers were massacred in Pulwama. Till about 26th of February, FII sold nearly $3.5 billion in India. 26th February, Wing Commander Abhinandan landed on the enemy land. Balakot strikes happened. On the Sunday, he was brought in back. 28th of February, from 28th February till about 31st of March, 28th of February till about 31st of March, India witnessed a gross inflow of above $5 billion. Unprecedented. Similarly, the tax cuts which happened on September 9th. After that, in 3 days, the markets moved up by 13%. The entire returns were given in those 3 days. And if you're not there in the market, whether small or mid or large, you're not there. Remember, the cycle of mid and large is very simple. First, the large moves. Parallelly, mid and small moves after the first run-up happens. Always is the first part. So the way you can, this is a smart guess, the way you can time the market is fairly simple. When you are seeing that the large cap indices have moved up by 8-10%, and the mid and small cap have still not participated in the broad-based rally, that's the time when you should enter. The only risk is if the correction were to happen, since the large cap has already moved up by 10 to 15%, if the correction again will happen from there, the mid and small cap, despite of being depressed, will again further correct by 15 to 20%. So everything multiplied by 2 to 3x in the mid and small cap space as compared to the large cap will be true on the upside as well as on the downside. So there is no formula to it. The only formula, as I'm saying, is wait for the large cap for 7, 8, 1.5 months to get settled down, enter, and then just wait. Remember, every time you enter and exit from a mutual fund, there are costs, there are tax implications. Tax is the biggest challenge which you will get killed in your long-term compounding. You paying tax today of 10% in long-term capital gains versus you allowing that money to compound for next 10 years and then paying the tax, it's a hell lot of difference. There's a hell lot of difference.
True. Thanks, Siddharth. Next question from Sujay is, do you think that a company which manages to have cash in hand at just, let's say, 0.1% of revenues, would that be a red flag according to you? Have you ever come across such instance?
Sorry, so say that again.
So what Sujay is asking is, do you think that a company which manages to have cash in hand at just 0.1% of revenues, would that be a red flag according to you?
So cash in hand is no parameter because you don't need cash in hand. Why do you need cash in hand? If your cash flows are coming and they are all getting reinvested back, you don't need any cash in hand. Cash in hand, if 0.1 or 0.2 or 1 or 2% does not matter. What you should actually see is the cash conversion ratio, which means how much sales is actually getting converted into cash into the bank. If it amounts to 99%, 98%, 95%, it's a brilliant number. Just go for that company. You should not avoid that company. Cash in hand is and cash in hand is actually not the true measure because cash in hand is a fictitious adjusting book entry, which means that the bank should have that money, but nobody verifies whether the bank balance actually is there or not there. In the olden days, cash in hand was actually used to mean that physical cash in hand.
Right.
And lower it is, better it is. So actually on the other side, you will see it better off because it means that only half a 0.1%, which means negligible cash is there in hand, which means most of the cash is getting reinvested back. So, or being paid out in the form of dividends. It's a good thing.
Got it. Next question from Akshay is, what is your view on big M&As in portfolio companies? Most of the M&As don't work as the acquirer pays way too much to the target. How to monitor these events?
100%. So bang on guys. So wherever there is a change in management, remember that you have to take it with a pinch of salt. Remember, most companies which have large M&A, they happen for only two reasons. Either the company wants to become much, much larger, which means that the ROEs definitely will get compromised. That's number one. Number two, whenever a large company merges with the other company, the culture clash will happen and eventually things will be worse off. And for next 3-4 years, there is definitely going to be challenges in terms of the growth because company tries to take everybody together in the process, they collapse. The better thing to do is when you see an acquisition of a big product range, of a brand, of a business, or of a unit, because that's complementary. That M&A can actually add value rather quickly within a span of 12 to 18 months. And these kind of M&As happen to change. Instead of greenfield projects, you are making them live and kicking. So you are acquiring the ROE, and you know that these synergies can work together. So there are a couple of companies. So there is an adhesive company which keeps doing these kind of synergistic acquisitions, specific acquisitions, because wherever I don't have presence, either I buy the market, I buy the product monopoly, I buy the process, so which is complementary to me. But where you are only doing for becoming a leader does not make any sense.
True. So next question from Darshan Shah is, in today's era, what is your view on the investing in PE funds, private equity funds?
So private equity funds, very interesting concept. So there are, again, PE funds are at different stages. So you have got early VCs, you have got late stage VCs, then you have got growth PE, and then you have got pre-IPO. So these are essentially the four kinds which are available in the market. Now I'm assuming that you're talking about the PE growth fund, which is the third stage of investing. That's the question which you are asking about. Remember that that's a very patient kind of investing, because here again, these are smaller businesses which are struggling to find they have got the business model right, but they are raising more capital to buy growth, to become large in terms of scale, so that they can go on the boards and get IPO'd. PE funds, you will obviously be one of the investors, and there'll be a large PE guys, so they understand this business, but you have to be very, very patient. You have to be very, very patient with at least 8, 9, 10 years of capital invested with them, and then only you can anticipate. Unfortunately, it has also been seen, irrespective whether it is VC funding, whether it is PE funding, whether it is pre-IPO funding, the longer term average returns at the portfolio level ranges between 18% to 22%. That's the best. That's the best in the class. And you have to pay the expenses, which are 1% plus the cost of carry, because they're all those. So your net returns plus the taxation, everything put together, will be in the range of 12-13%. Now, do you want to be in the jail for 8-9 years for your own money and earn the similar kind of money? If you have smart acumen, you should rather look at the small cap companies who are market leaders, who have clean accounting practices, who have good ethics. Invest into them. At least you have liquidity there. And you have much more information there. So my request would be, invest rather at a place where you have liquidity, because you don't know in life everything is uncertain, and when do you need this liquidity? So that's my request.
I think these are good products for the HNIs who can actually allocate 2 to 3 to 4% in these kind of funds without impacting their liquidity and all.
Correct.
Those things. But not. I don't think so. More than 5% of your net worth should be invested in these kind of PE funds. And when PE funds come in like in a form of AIF, the minimum investment comes around 1 CR. So unless you have a worth of 20 CR, I think it's not worth thinking about these.
Worth of 20 CR, you should have an investable surplus.
Investable surplus of 20 CR, I agree.
So,
correct.
And house, remember one more thing, this is basic financial planning, guys. This is very, very critical. Never include your own residential house as part of your net worth.
Correct.
Irrespective of how expensive it is, it should be there, but outside your net worth. You have invested into that. If you have leverage on that, square off the investments which you have taken, net it off. I'm not saying you pay it off because you may get tax benefit. The cost of leverage is lower, but net it off from your investments, and that is your net worth. A basic funda. Please do not get mixed up that your net worth is 100 when your house is worth 80. If your living house is 80, then your net worth is technically only 20. Your second house can be your net worth. Third house can be your net worth. Land can be your net worth. Jewelry can be your net worth. Not your living house. Very important.
Completely with you on Siddharth. I mean, that's completely, kind of agreeable. The last question which I have for the day is Mohit is asking, but I just checked. He has already left, but I think this is an interesting question for others to listen. On your coffee can approach, how do you evaluate new sectors which don't have long historical performance?
So what we do is very, very simple. We keep looking at, so people believe that good companies who are just listed do not have track history. So I'll give you a very simple example. There is a large insurance company which recently got listed, or general insurance companies, but their data has been in the public domain for last 10, 15, 20 years. Now they may not be listed. So as long as the financial parameters are met, I don't have any challenge in evaluation. And all those data, you can get it. And there are companies which are willing to share all those data from their own end. And these are all audited reports, which actually you can get it from the MCA website as well. By paying just 35 rupees, you can actually get their entire data for last 15, 20 years as well. Every year you have to pay for every balance sheet. You just need to pay 35 bucks and you can procure the entire audited books of accounts for the entire year. So that's number one. Second is, what we believe is most of the companies which are even the new age or the technology, if they do not have track history of more than 2 or 3 years and quickly they have got on the bourses, they may or may not even sustain. So it's like human character. What Vaibhav is today is not because he has learned something in last 2 years or 3 years. What Vaibhav is today is the composite belief, experience, and learning of last 25 or 30 years. And you can't change the temperament. And the best time to check the temperament and the character of the person is during tough times. Because during good times, everything, everybody, and every human beings seems to be delivering well. When the tough times come, that's when. And only during cycles of last 10 years or 20 years, one can assess that how the company delivered. Did they get along with their partners? So when the demonetization happened, when the GST implementation happened, these larger companies were still very powerful, but the smaller units, which were the partners, the suppliers, the distributors, they needed help. Did the company support them? If not, they are not going to be coffee can companies in future. So better not invest in them.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Siddharth. I think we have done with the questions. So we are good, I think. And in the meanwhile, just like I saw on the chats, India wins the first gold. So congratulations everybody.
That's brilliant. That's like phenomenal.
Yep. So we end on a very, very positive and a good note. So thank you, everybody. Yeah. Yes.
Which one? Which sport? Which one?
I'm just with you. So someone can, if write on the chat or can just unmute themselves and can share this news.
Oh, javelin! Wow!
Javelin throw.
Wow! Yeah. So that guy came into the finals. Correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So Neeraj, what was his name? I think Neeraj Chopra.
Wonderful.
Bajrang also wins bronze in freestyle. Ah, great. Towards the fag end, we are winning a few more medals. Neeraj Chopra. Yes. Thanks, Vedika. So thank you, Siddharth, and thank you everybody to join on the Saturday evening. And it is great to have you. It was great to have you over here. And Siddharth, thank you so much for sparing out time for IIM Indore Alumni Association folks. And we look forward to have more such sessions from you. So we'll be in touch and let you know about it. Sure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vaibhav. Thanks the organizing team. Stay safe and stay well. And I'll keep sharing some of the interesting notes which you can refer. It will help you to just increase your investment knowledge, because ultimately, the more you learn, the more you will win. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Siddharth.